Well, look at that. I think we are live. Well, anyway, I see myself in the astronaut, in the spationaut, actually. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining today, Wednesday the 30th, to an exciting webinar that I've been wanting to do for the longest time. Thank you for joining wherever you are. And yeah, let's start. Let's start with this. Today the conversation is going to be, I believe, exciting anyway. Talking about the integration of QLab, this powerful show control and SPAT revolution. For the ones that don't know me, my name is Hugo Larin with the FLUX Immersive team. So today, QLab crafting shows with QLab. We won't be spending too much time in SPAT revolution and all the possibility. Just that would require a session. We'll be focusing on the integration of both tools. Well, I think that we can actually get started if everyone is ready. Let's not wait a single moment. Okay, let's actually get going. So let's talk about this integration, the audio integration part. I mean, it kind of starts there, right? So we've got two softwares, two applications, and we'll be talking about integrating those two from an audio perspective and from a control perspective. And we'll be putting some focus on a single machine setup, single computer. And why is that? Well, yes, maybe if you're crafting a show, you will end up with dedicated playback computers and rendering computer and environment. But as you are producing, creating, crafting the show, chances are that you're on the single computer. And that's what we're going to be focusing on today a bit. So what we've got going here, some of you are most probably familiar with QLab. QLab has up to 64 Q output. And we're going to be taking those audio Q output as source objects into SPAT, object for the object-based mixing environment that we're talking about here. And we're going to be able to do this with something that's called the SPAT Send plugin. Some of you may be familiar with SPAT Send in the digital audio workstation domain. We use it for automation and for audio routing. But thanks to this feature called local audio PAT on a single computer, we can actually bond the two applications together. There's other ways to do it. Of course, people that are in the Mac OS environment know about these bridge audio solutions that exist, being, the black hole solution, and there's a long list of solutions in Mac OS. But here we've got the plugin to ease the whole integration. We're actually going to be looking at that from the audio perspective. Then obviously for a larger deployment, we'll be talking about using the core audio of the system to route a QLab output, being an AES 67, AVB, Dante. I'm using AVB here. I'm going to be routing down to the console later on. So as you are, building a larger system, a deployment of playbacks and renderer, maybe main and backup, we're obviously going to be using audio over IP solutions or MADI, multi-channel audio solutions that exist, right? There's two SPAT Revolution to support this. Important to note, we've got the Essential version. I'm going to be working in Essential today, up to 32Q output. That's the limitation of SPAT Essential, but that's obviously a lot of audio objects, mono, stereo objects from the Q outputs of QLab, and we can actually jump and go to the ultimate version. I'll come back on those limitations a bit later on, just so you understand right now, 32Q output with Essential, up to 64Q output with Ultimate. Now, that's not a limitation of Ultimate, but that's obviously QLab with the 64Q outputs, okay? Moving in now to the control aspect, because, we've talked about the integration on the audio side. Let's talk about the control aspect. No secrets, we are using OSC. The majority of immersive audio, spatial audio systems out there are using OSC, Open Sound Control. So we're going to be using those network crews, creating network queues and sending OSC messages to SPAT. And those can be different things. They can be single messages, and a single message is just basically, telling an object, do something, change a parameter, a specific one. Now, we use interpolation time options in SPAT, so you can actually add this as an argument. We'll look at it as a option to actually do a smooth movement instead of just a, direct move without any interpolation, or crossfade time, if you want to call it this way. Other options in this control integration will be to use what we call the fade message. So that is a QLab feature. We'll look at it quite rapidly, actually, when we dive in a few seconds. So those fade messages are basically, instead of using interpolation, you're going to be using the ramp, an actual ramp in 1D. So basically going from one value to the other on a certain time. And thanks to QLab for this. And last but not least, it's what we call the 2D fade, the XY coordinate map, right? The X and the Y of a source in space, the position, which is a part of QLab as well. So those are kind of our three ways to be integrating our solution. Now, the grammar, because yes, that is a reality out there. Every single piece of spatial audio engines, or a lot of, products using OSC for that matter of fact, use their own grammar. And like everyone, we have our SPAT grammar. It is an extensive list of properties for sources, for rooms, for master, pretty much anything. Even some setups are possible with OSC and SPAT. But there is another grammar that I want to kind of bring into the conversation, and that is the ADM-OSC. I'll cover this in 2 seconds. So both grammars are possible, and you'll understand the advantages of maybe using the ADM-OSC grammar. As time evolves. So we are providing template. That is an important part of the conversation. Granted, you can download a long list of OSC messages and make your own, but we have these templates that are available. I actually think we're updating some today as well. So some of those example files basically are there where you can copy the message, massage it to whatever you need, but that simplifies the whole exercise. Okay, and well, am I supposed to talk about this? Well, QLab 5 is around the corner. So I was just going to say, watch this space. QLab 5 is coming. Don't have a date for it, but there's some interesting things that will, again, ease that integration, simplify it. Although, it's actually going quite well, these examples. There's some very interesting thing coming from the Figure 53 camp. Voila. Now, I briefly talked about, refer as ADM-OSC, and I want to do a quick parenthesis on this. And this is an industry initiative in live production, a use case that started with Radio France and our friends from L Acoustics and FLUX, and we have been leading literally with these groups, and then a larger group actually joined but the early initiative started with those three entities here. And the idea was actually to come up with an open source industry for standardization, okay? That is a challenge. You're starting to integrate, different controllers, different show controls, different spatial engines for that matter of fact. The fact that you have to deal with different grammar and messages and one and the other and converting and patching is often challenging. So really that initiative is to simplify this, a simple message that everyone understands. And we're getting a group around the table for this. And this is for the object-based audio ecosystems, the workflow of remote controllers, rendering engine, digital audio workstation. You'll actually see as I continue some of the members that have joined that group already. And the goal here is just to define a standard for the positioning information, the data. Let's call it simple X, Y, Z, or azimuth elevation distance is actually part of that as well. But it's to define the standard and normalize mechanism that everyone understands. Really simplifies the integration. So that was kind of a quick one. I mean, FLUX has been involved in helping that group to actually get some stress tests, some modules, and the group of manufacturers growing. This ADM-OSC is now possible in SPAT Revolution, and ELISA controller. Ovation, our friends from Emerging Technology, which have a playout system, show control systems, are using that integration. Nundo, Steinberg. And interestingly, in Ovation and Nundo, we're literally talking about the 3D panner, the panner in that show controller or in Nundo that speaks ADM-OSC to SPAT Revolution. There's some sessions coming on that later on. But yeah, going on, continuing, Space Map Go from Meyer Sound has recently added it on the input side of their system. And lately as well, our friend from Sound Particles with OSC Space Controller. I wish I actually had set it up. It's actually right there. Where is that space controller? Yeah, space controller right there. Quite interesting tools, where you use your phone to direct the sound, and you can use distance. Let me just using this to actually to move the distance of the object into space. Again, using ADM-OSC, so sound particle, open space control. No time to actually show this today, but very interesting tool. And last but not least, well, I do mention QLab with upcoming version 5. The rumor is, let's call it a rumor, that ADM-OSC, could be part of some future releases. Anyway, the grammar is public. The information is public. Someone could build a QLab template with using that ADM-OSC grammar if you wanted to. Okay. Moving on. So let's actually look at some little diagrams there to understand what's going on. So let's first focus on that standalone creation workstation, my laptop, my computer, that I want to be integrating QLab application and SPAT Revolution. And what we've got going here is the network queues that you're familiar in QLab are basically, being sent to a network patch. And when we are on a single computer, we are using what we call local host. We're going to be configuring this together in 2 seconds. And local host 127.0.0.1 for the ones that want the specific information, but we'll look at it. And that is the ability to send the network messages on the same computer to both application. And SPAT will be receiving this as OSC inputs, as a local host input, and that will allow for the control portion. Next but not least, obviously, the audio portion on a single computer, what I'm showing today, is the use of SPAT send on our Q outputs, up to 64 Q outputs, SPAT send plugin, and the local audio pad feature that allows us to send mono or stereo objects. So Q outputs are becoming mono or stereo objects into SPAT. Now, why 64? That is the limitation of QLab, as I was saying, and why mono or stereo? That is, again, the limitation of QLab. Now, you could have a 7.1 track that you're playing and sending them as multiple monos or monos and stereo combination, for that matter of fact. But that is a limitation of the Q outputs and the plugin that we can put on those Q outputs. Coming as source in SPAT as software audio. So on the SPAT Revolution side, software inputs, and if you look at the right side, hardware output. And that is new from 22.2. We support incoming from software and outputting to hardware. And that would mean outputting to what? Outputting to a pair of headphones. Could be, for that matter of fact, my little audio interface that I travel with, or for that matter of fact, the local output on the computer, and be able to listen to what's going on and prepare the show. But yes, that hardware device can be the audio device for a studio system, for my output from my studio, or for that matter of fact, a larger count of audio output for a larger system on site, in a venue, on a design, on a show. So that is our single computer setup. Now, if we actually move to a dual computer setup, and we'll talk about this, we'll wrap up at the end, moving from a single to a dual machine. Well, basically, what the difference is both applications are running on their own computer, and we be, in this case, using the network with IP addresses, messages to SPAT. So in this case, no more local audio, IP address destination from QLab to our SPAT Revolution for control, and then the audio over IP, or MADI, being our audio routing method. Now we're back to core audio in this particular case, core audio of the computer, the audio driver, or the audio interface, and talking to a separate computer. And now that can obviously expand. We can have, 2 playbacks, 2 SPAT Revolution, main and backup, complete redundant system in a live production, theatrical production, where obviously, no failure is an option. I did skip rapidly the remote control option. Didn't really skip it. If I go back, in the case of a single machine, you can obviously be using QLab remote, very practical. I'll talk about this briefly, but other options exist to control SPAT, for that matter of fact. I was mentioning sound particles, space controller as an OSC, Lemur touch OSC, anything that speaks OSC can pretty much become a remote control of SPAT Revolution as well. And from a creation perspective, obviously it becomes interesting. Same will apply when we go to 2 computer. Then obviously the iOS remote for QLab will be for QLab specific, and we'll have these other iOS remote controller for SPAT Revolution as you're building a system. Okay, good stuff. Okay, we're going to dive in as well shortly. What time is it? Well, we're doing good. We've got you about for 45 minutes with Q&A here. Let's just kind of briefly wrap up what are going to be able to achieve. Now that we understand the control of the audio, what are we going to be able to achieve from a control perspective? Let me just put myself back here. Here we are. So number one, I guess the most basic one in show control is being able to recall snapshots. Granted, you may want to be sending a specific control messages from QLab to move a specific source with a specific parameter. And that may be something that you're doing at a specific moment in the show. But chances are that you'll be using snapshot to recall the scene, right? The cue or the sub cues. And we can do this, with that integration. And that would mean doing some go plus, go minus, as some people like to call it. We call it next and previous, right? Just firing next, 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 next. Now we support interpolation time, and that's important to understand that. We can do this with an interpolation time, say next, but next in 2 seconds, so a 2-second move, smooth movement from one to the other. So these are the recall with interpolation time. We can go next previous, we can go straight recall snapshot 28 as well. So that would be kind of the base. Because as you're programming, you may want to be using QLab like more for management, like updating a snapshot. You've modified the scene, right? Maybe you have a remote control, you've positioned some source around, and you want to capture this. We still have the ability, which is not more of a show control, more of a show programming tool, to actually do management, create snapshot, recall snapshots, update snapshots, and so on and so forth. We have a few templates that I'm going to show later on that could do that. Now that's the snapshot control portion. Let's talk about source objects, obviously, because we can go beyond just a snapshot. And in this case, our key tool would be using a 2D map. Okay, 2D map feature of QLab. You'll see that next XY, we can actually draw our path, draw our trajectory, for that matter of fact, with the exact time that we want. Okay, now we use both systems, polar or Cartesian. Some people think XYZ, have no idea what polar is all about, but we use both. We come from this world. AED polar, meaning azimuth, right? 360-degree azimuth. Elevation, if we are dealing with elevation, but the other one would be distance of the source in actually in the SPAT environment. Good stuff. Well, and then all other source and room control messages. Mute the room, bring down the level of what we call a room, a virtual space. Okay, moving on. Now I want a little beware here. Some support messages, some support, message come often here. Interpolation time. Quick note. Comma versus period. Yes, QLab uses the system, okay? The system number separator, okay? So basically, in your OS, you've got basically a configuration that says, hey, the comma or the actual period is the separator for numbers. And that is important to understand because we use this for interpolation time, okay? I'm going to be showing it to you. That's very important to understand. Make sure to use the proper number separator in your QLab file. Our templates actually have both. We have what we call the Euro version and a US version. They're basically, one use the comma, the other one use the period. This way you don't have to change your system configuration, but ultimately that would be the thing to do. Okay, let's dive, because there's nothing like diving. And I'm going to be putting my headphones on because I want to be able to hear. Okay, where are we at? Here we go. So I got my headphones on. We got SPAT Revolution that is open on this side. If I actually go to the home page, I see that the essential version is what is being used right now. And let's kind of start there and talk about the configuration aspect of SPAT Revolution. There won't be much today. I'm just going to hit the preference page to understand what we're going to be doing from an I/O perspective, audio. And you see my input device is set to none. And the reason for this is simple. I have no hardware audio coming in. I'm going to be using software input, as I was explaining. On the output device, I'm going to a black hole 16 channel. Why is this? This is what I'm going to be piping back to you. You'll be able to listen in binaural. Hopefully you have a pair of headphones kicking around. I'll be doing binaural audio, but you'll be able to listen as I'm moving. Setup there, quite simple. We'll come back on the OSC connections here a bit later. For now, let's actually hit the setup page and we'll briefly look at, configuring. And in essential, it's simplified to the point of a setup wizard that allows us to create the session that we need. And we're going to do this right now, and ask us to configure a new room. I'm going to be choosing binaural audio. By default, there's a HRTF that's being picked up. Not going to talk about this now. And here is the ability basically to decide what that mixer is going to be or what those sources are going to be. I'm just going to go simple for now. I'm going to go for a mono and a stereo, okay? So creating a mono and a stereo SPAT source. You see some options there. Okay, okay with hardware, okay with software. We're going to be accepting this with software. And here we are. The configuration is ready from a SPAT perspective. 2 sources, a room, 2 objects in the room, and we'll be dealing with, with those objects shortly. Now, what's missing? Obviously, an audio source, and what's missing on the output side? The actual output. Let me actually configure the output right away. That will be as simple as adding an output block, and that would be me feeding. And by default, it's output 1 and 2, and that's what I'm going to be sending you on your headphones. Okay. So that was it for our friend SPAT Revolution. Let's now move to QLab. We are on a blank page of QLab. I'll be using some files that already exist, but let's talk about that configuration from an audio perspective. When we are setting up QLab, we're talking about configuring what we call the workspace settings, the workspace, and those settings are actually following your file. So if I actually open the QLab workspace setting, I'm going to be hitting the audio section, and you see all the audio patch possibilities. Now, I'm not going to deal with that too much right now. You can see I already have my E6 Avid S6L engine straight there, and that would be me be ready to send audio cues up to 64 straight to that console. But what I'm going to have you appreciate here, if we go and edit the patch, we get this nice little window here, and that is our 64 cue outputs of QLab. And thanks to the plugin support in QLab, we can add some sending elements, okay? Some audio sending element, our local audio path. You have the choice to configure in mono stereo, as I was saying before. I'm going to go for a 2-channel here on the first one. And that's it. We're going to be adding an effect. Well, it's not necessarily an effect. It's an audio pipe. Thanks to FLUX SC, software engineering, local audio path technology, we'll take that SPAT Revolution Send, a plugin that we've been using for integration of Logic Pro Tools and Reaper and all the other DAWs on the planet. And I'm just going to stick one there. And here we are. Here's a little SPAT Revolution plugin. We're not going to do much with that one. We're basically just going to engage local audio path. And that will be it, okay? Let's go back to our SPAT quickly to see what happened. Oh, yeah, magic. By magic, that source is now there, okay? And what I'm going to do in the back that you don't see is I'm going to add another one. I'm going to add the mono one as well. SPAT Revolution Send, and up, and you see it. Okay, as simple as this. My sources are created. I'm ready to connect them and go with my live. So I can take that one, drag it there, drag this one, and here we are with a stereo input and mono input as 2 objects. These are Q output 1 and 2, Q output 3 of QLab, right? If we go back on QLab, right, Q output 1 and 2 that are being used here, and then Q output 3 for my mono object. That's it. As simple as this, okay? And then we'll be able to actually get some audio going, and we are ready pretty much. I want to do a quick parenthesis as well on the name. You can in the plugin, and you can see right there, change the name. And if I call this Q output 3, okay, and we go back to SPAT, and I'll show board screen later. You see that I actually renamed it. So you can from QLab, maybe this that this is a specific audio cue, a sound effects 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or whatever naming you would like to do. That is being done on the QLab side, automatically renaming the source, in SPAT, and you see when Q output 3. See that name for that matter of fact. Okay, excellent. What else do we have? So we have audio going in theory. I'll be firing a session in 2 seconds. Let's talk about the network configuration. Let's go back to QLab. We'll start with our QLab side. I'm going to be able to close this. And we'll go on the networking aspect of it. Okay, so on the networking aspect of it, I'm just going to be naming this SPAT, and that is us deciding of a destination, okay, a destination. I've talked about local host. This is what we're doing now, 0001. That is the way to, configuring that local destination. That IP address could be a remote computer, another one, and that would be us later anyway, showing the 2-computer setup. Important will be the port number. That can be configured on both sides, but I'm going to tell you right now, if you put 8000, you'll save yourself a lot of trouble. 8000 is the default port in SPAT. And our templates are actually exactly this. And that's it. It's configured. That patch, that network patch is actually set. And we are done from that perspective, okay? Excellent. Excellent. Going back to SPAT, now that we have, network output on one side, we'll go back to our SPAT and we'll hit the preference page. I told you later that we would be going in the OSC connection. And I'm going to be simply using, there's no QLab preset. There's no need for a preset. So we basically are going to choose an input, which we call a custom. We choose where the network message is coming from. Again, local host, what we're doing. And the default port is 8000. There's nothing to reflect on. Et voilà. Et voilà. As we start to talk about OSC and OSC messages, there's one concept that we need to understand is the concept of index numbers. And if you actually open a room, you see those numbers right there, 1 and 2, okay? And that will be very important for us. If we actually go in QLab again, and we want to be doing, let's say we want to do a network queue for our object number 1, and that would be index number 1. I'm going to hit the Q network for the one that prefers shortcut. It's Apple 8, and that is not Apple 8. Yeah, it's Apple 8. Thank you. Oh, I've pressed the wrong one. Not watching what I'm doing. And we have a network queue. Now, we're not going to start to build all messages one by one because we'll be here for all day. I know these messages by heart. Source /1 / let's just say azimuth at -90°. Okay, and that would be our message that we're preparing for SPAT. We're using 1 here as we want to be moving the object number 1. And if I send that message, and if I go back to QLab, well, we see -90° on that source. Okay, so I've moved this. Well, probably better to do QLab and SPAT like this. Voila, let me just move. It'll be easier. It'll be easier for all of you. Et voila. Okay, so if I actually change this and put this back to 0, and I go send that message, you saw the source get back on the center. Now we're moving on a stereo source. So we're moving the Barry center, the center of mass, the center of that stereo object. Okay, if we are on a mono source, if I actually go on source number 2, right, and I say azimuth 0 and I send, well, you're expecting that mono to go dead center. Now, he hasn't changed the distance of the object, just the source where it needs to be, okay? Easy like this. Let's just a quick parenthesis on index -1. It is in our template, and it's an interesting one. It's the selected source. So if I actually go in SPAT, you see that I've got source number 2 selected. My message going to be going to the selected source. So source number 2, send, boom. And number 2 is that mono object to -90°. So you saw me just put -1 here. Kind of powerful. Okay, enough of the talking. Let's actually load a little session here. Let's load a little session. I'm going to load, let's load this one. So loading a session, bunch of stuff in it. Close that other one. Yeah. QLab is powerful. There's multiple workstation at the same time. Okay, here we are. What happened in SPAT? Let's look at this. I'm going to be closing that session. For that matter of fact, you see all the sources appear, and those sources are gone from the session, actually disconnected. I'm going to go close this environment, and there we are, back in an empty space. Now we could configure this thanks to the get send return button. Up there, I can actually discover all these sources. This is a 16 stereo QLab template. Could be one of my template. There's multiple one possible, but we're gonna go simpler. I'm just gonna open an actual session. Let me just mute the audio to be careful with your little ears, just in case. And I'm gonna load the 16 stereo queue here. And here we are. Here we are in an environment, and we have these Q outputs that are connected to 16 stereo sources, feeding a binaural room. We're using binaural, going output 1 and 2 right there, and that would be what you hear. And here we are. If I actually go in QLab and I go ask and mute source number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, they actually disappear for us as well. Right? And if I fire source number 1, you should be seeing some audio, and I'm seeing it. You're most probably not hearing it. And you will be if I unmute the source. Let's try that. Yeah, hearing this to your left, most probably. Okay, well, he's stacking some sound. I'll fire all these sounds for that matter of fact. Mute number 1. Let's unmute source number 2. Right. And there we are starting to build a soundscape in SPAT Revolution. Right, mute those sources, be soloing a particular source. Should be hearing this in the back. Voila. Now, thanks to our reverb engine, it would be quite interesting. And right now we have reverb. Some volume a bit. Okay, so that is us basically playing with the perceptual factors. I'm going to do this in my other session. I guess you're getting this. This is it. We are ready to go. We are ready to send messages. In QLab, in that file, I've got some mute rooms and unmute rooms. Let's say we want to drop the gain on source number 2 for -5. Well, I could just, fire this up. Let's see what it's doing. Yes, it's sending source number 2, gain -5. And I could do this with the ramp, for that matter of fact. Back to our comma or period. We're going to be using period. I've got a system of using the period. And that will be us. And if you watch source number 2 and go. You see number 2, it's fading, -3, -5. So the 2-second ramp on that specific source right there, okay? Excellent. Let's get back to a smaller session and kind of deal with a bit of the perceptual factors. Perceptual factors in SPAT. I'm going to be closing the SPAT session up, and I'm going to be opening. Let's go simple, simple, simple. There we are. Let's try that one. Okay, 1 mono source, 1 stereo source. I just opened this session in SPAT. You see it, the 2 sources appear. I'm going to save you the configuration. You saw me drag before. Just going to open the session. We'll get us going. Just simple 2 sources. Here we are. So here we are in a session. Stereo mono feeding 2 sources. Again, a room and binaural. We'll look at channel-based system, for that matter of fact, and outputting to maybe an Atmos system or studio system or any speaker arrangement, for that matter of fact. And here we are. So let me maybe fire a sound. Do we have music? And we do. And we do. That is our stereo object. Right? Now we can move in space. I don't have reverb on it. I could. Reverb off. That kind of gets us to talk about the perceptual factors a bit. Do you see the panel when I click on the source here? I see all the properties, and I'm not going to go through all of them today. But I want you to appreciate perceptual factors, and this is our direct sound presence, our room presence, which we don't have a reverb now, but if we activate the verb, right, this is all controllable with OSC per object. And the perceptual factor, the interesting thing is that we can actually enable the reverb engine, but we can do it in generating early reflections that are localized with the source, and that's critical to what we're doing in SPAT Revolution. We can generate clusters, so late reflections that are by default diffuse but can be relocalized. And last but not least, a tail that's completely diffuse, okay? So that is us again. Well, you can hear it. The tail's dead, but you can... I can't believe what God's done. Through us, He's given life. Now I just close those reflections. Subtle reflections here. Okay. Now, do we have something else? Yeah, we probably have something else. Where's Patrick?
Spring.
There you are, Patrick.
Spring has come, and joyfully the birds welcome it with cheerful song, and the streams, caressed by the breath
You can
of
probably
zephyrs,
feel, you know, the
flow
sense of
swiftly.
realism that you can start to build as you have a reverb engine, your object is moving. And that is important to understand in SPAT Revolution is we have beyond, you know, panning, if you want, and sending an audio signal to a binaural output to a loudspeaker arrangement is actually this attenuation model. As the source goes away, there's an attenuation of the level, which obviously drives more reverb engine. You hear more of the ambiance per se the room. And beyond that is air absorption simulation. So a little filtering in the high frequency becomes very, very natural. Now you need not generate reverb engine all the time, but when you want, when you do, it becomes really, really powerful.
The fair spring sky in all its glory.
Okay, Patrick is dead. For now, anyway. We maybe explore one thing here is actually if we wanted to talk about the speaker arrangement. We've been in binaural, but maybe someone is actually wanting to work on a specific arrangement. And we can do this by changing that configuration. I've muted for 1 second. I'm actually going to change back to our setup wizard. I'm not going to change my object configuration, but I'm going to change to a channel-based system. What channel-based is? Speaker arrangements. Custom arrangements, that we could do. I'll load one later on. Actually, I have one maybe just ready here. Do I have that ready? Yeah, we'll do it later. We'll do that part later. But yeah, we could do it on this one just by firing the setup wizard. I can change the channel-based arrangement. Let me choose an Atmos setup that I have here. Could be whatever speaker arrangement. What I want you to understand is obviously that we can change the configuration to an actual speaker arrangement. And we're still going to use binaural, but this time we'll use it for binaural monitor. We'll virtualize the speaker arrangement, no longer the sources. And that's interesting because we can actually virtualize our speaker arrangement. And the disadvantage of a speaker arrangement, if it's a stereo system, we won't be able to localize in the back as much. Signals will stay in the front. So that's what binaural monitor virtualizing will help us to do. Okay. Let me just remove that block quickly. Right, so the configuration, nothing has changed. The input, everything is done, but we have now a actual, and you could see it, a Dolby Atmos setup. Could be whatever arrangement. Could be obviously a live venue, a frontal systems. We're not going to talk about speaker configuration today. But what we are feeding here is a master for all your outputs, and we're feeding as well a binaural master that will feed a binaural monitor. And if I connect this, and I should be able to unmute this.
Ori.
Yes. Voila. Now this time, contrary to our setup earlier, which was purely binaural.
Spring has come, and joy it with cheerful song, and the streams, caressed by the breath of zephyrs, flow swiftly.
This is us virtualizing that scene in binaural audio over headphones, okay? So we'll be very practical, that could be a speaker. You'll see me load a speaker arrangement typical from a show shortly. Okay, good for that. Well, let's move this a step. We'll stop that session for a second, and I'm gonna load a little. Again, open the session, boom, SPAT discover everything for us. Right. See it clearly. And close that session. I'm gonna open a session that's already done. City, voila. Okay. Here we are again. We've got some stereo elements, some mono elements of a little soundscape design. This actually had a 7.1 source, and that the example I was saying, limitation mono stereo. I'm feeding the stereo left, right, the center, the ambiance, well, not the ambiance, the surround left, right, all as separate elements into SPAT. Then I've got other elements, a little kid ambiance, playing playground sound, and then other elements, mono, stereo. And they're feeding a binaural room back to an output ear, and go. And go. Et voila. You'll see a little animation going shortly. Oh, here you are. Oh, bicycle moving towards the right. No, the left. Yeah, my headphones on the right side. So a little bicycle. And now, wondering how that was done. Well, let's actually have a look at the QLab now. All right, so we've got this this basically group, that's firing a bunch of sounds. But in the case of the bicycle, I have an actual move specific to this one. So let's look at this move. We'll hit the setting page, and this is it. This is us speaking to source number 7 on the XY using the 2D map. And if you watch SPAT on on the right side here, you can see as I'm drawing, and that becomes very interesting if you want to be drafting a specific, sorry for that, a specific movement. Play that movement. Oh, it's too long, 20 seconds. Let's go for 10 seconds. Or 2 seconds for that matter of fact. Let's do that. Boom. Yeah. Anyway, what I wanted you to understand here is that obviously we can control the duration of that total trajectory move, but beyond that is us defining the scale. Now we're on 2 and 2. SPAT uses absolute value. We have basically a canvas of 100 meter by 100 meter. This is the max distance, if you want the max XYZ. And so in this case, if I add a map of 100, well, you would see us, the source actually going outside, and that is me choosing where I'm actually, working. If I reduce this to 2 as well, now, I'm going to be maximum 2 meter. My corner here is at 2 meter. From the listener perspective, we're always working from that reference, okay? Making sense? Excellent. And if we actually look at the destination of those network messages, this is actually going currently on SPAT local. And SPAT local is my 12700 local host. I could be sending this to the SPAT network. And I'll show you this as we're going to be looking at how would we move from a single computer to 2 computers. Okay. Okay. And we have other little sounds here and there. Probably just muted there. Solo. My little cat, and a little cat sometime. Oh, am I muted? I am. Oh, there you are, little cat. All right, just firing a bunch of sounds around. I'll even have that little siren moving around. Again, we're using a 2D movement for that little object moving on. So you're getting the concepts here. Let's briefly talk about a recall, actually recalling some snapshots. We've got this a perfect example of a snapshot recall method, snap/recall. We're going to be loading the template that we provide, so you'll see all the possibilities. And snapshot recall number 1, if I fire this is a 2-second move of an actual scene. Same thing if I recall this one, right? So that's us sending a message with interpolation time, and SPAT's receiving the message, and we'll be doing that change in 2 seconds. Okay? Excellent, excellent, excellent. Well, maybe we actually talk about the dual computer setup a bit. So now, what I've been showing you is me working on a single machine, QLab and SPAT, firing with the local audio PAT feature. But interestingly enough, those audios are actually going as well on my AVB audio output. If I look at the workspace setting, right, it's still going out there. What that means is that the fact that we put a plugin doesn't stop the signal. We're grabbing the signal, bringing it local. But my configuration to be moving to a dual computer system is ready to go. And we'll be looking at this briefly here. So yes, my audio is already patched. My Q output, nothing is changing. I don't need to repatch anything. Obviously, I can be choosing which audio device, I want to be descending to, being a Dante, a DVS, being an AES 67. That patch will remain as well. You're just changing the actual audio output, device per se. Then moving to a dual computer setup, well, you're already kind of ready from an audio perspective. There's nothing to change but to choose the proper audio device. And then will be the networking aspect. And as I was explaining you, or just showing you briefly, if I go in the network, I already have configured those, those actual two destinations. So moving from a single machine to a dual machine would be as simply to say, hey, your siren move, you're no longer going local, you're going on network. And that's it. You basically change the destination, and that's it, that's all. Okay, change the destination of a message. Now, if I fire this, you won't see it going in SPAT anymore locally, but you will be seeing it on my second computer as I fire this. So step number one, from moving from one computer to two computer. Let me look at our remote computer here. I've just loaded a, actually looking at this computer right behind me. This is using the ultimate version of SPAT Revolution, which gives us the ability of doing multiple rooms. We'll talk about the differences in the version. But now we are on that dual computer setup. We just simply need to, and let me get control on that machine. I can simply load that session, the same session I've loaded on my single machine. I can load it now. And here we are. And we look at the setup and we see all these red, this, the sends, the audio sends are no longer there, right? There's no local source anymore. We're going to be moving to an hardware setup. And thanks here to the little button called Convert to Hardware, I convert everything to hardware in a matter of a click. Go to the input matrix. Let's call it a 1-to-1 matrix, if I can remember my shortcuts. Thank you. 1-to-1 matrix, and here we are. Now there's no sound, and because I don't have anything going. Well, it's supposed to be sound anyway. Oh, I've closed in the back here. But anyway, don't need to set it to be sound. You got to trust me on that one. But that is simple as this, right? So, we're receiving our audio from an AVB network on that particular case. I've got the console in the equation. That's what is closed right now. So my audio from QLab are going on the console, in this case, console going to the SPAT. But that was me, modifying the session to be a hardware input session. Patch is all done, channel 16 here, you see, so the 1-to-1 patch. And if I want to be sending a network message, I'm going to go back in my QLab here. I had modify, was it the move on the siren? Yes, going to the SPAT network. And you see the movement, right? So I'm firing the movement. Now it's no longer local, it's that remote computer. So the move from one machine to two machine is very practical. And I can go back on one machine. I haven't broken anything really on my single machine setup, as long as I send the destination at the right place, okay? Good. Yeah. Well, if there's any question, we'll be taking some, as we are slowly wrapping up this session. A lot of things could be talked about. It's not obviously, the goal today to explore all QLab possibilities and all SPAT possibilities. We would be there for days. But one thing that I can definitely do here is just to, before we move back, let me just open this little session here. Here we are. I'm going to close this one. Let's go back to QLab. Up, and QLab go. Okay, this is what our actual template a bit looks like. Many things that we're basically doing here is that we're providing examples of a bunch of parameters. So it's not the exact file. I'll explain you the different files that we have available, but in all our file, or in our example files anyway, we show example of having a position preset, at 4 meter X, 4 meter Y on source number 1, and so on and so forth. Azimuth at minus 90 degree, elevation at 0, distance at 2 with an AED message. And there's complete details on everything. And these are position change and other source parameters that can be changed. In the movement, same thing here. We have like examples of just a movement on a 2 by 2 meter square. We could change obviously again the max X and Y if we wanted to deal with that. A ping pong effect that we could fire, just kind of examples, that can be the processing change as well, primarily for the reverb engines, so changing the presence, the warmth, the brilliance, the reverb. So all these are available in our examples, kind of pre-create. They're all on source number 1, but I can obviously copy paste, say that's for source number 12, or -1 if I wanted to be talking to the selected source. Other examples that we have in our file is, muting a source, unmuting a source, setting a gain, to -10, resetting the gain, well, or setting a gain with, 2.0 in, oops, not that, but 2.0 in 2 seconds. Again, interpolation time that are working. We have in the same manner example for snapshots. If I actually look at briefly at snapshots here. SPAT snapshots, here we are. Okay, so yes, same thing in our example files, the ability to create snapshots, the ability to remove snapshots. So that's more for management, not for show control, but kind of practical. If you have your QLab, you have your little templates with create, recall, and manage and update. Makes it easy. Snapshot current update is a quite practical one. You're on current snapshot, you're modifying from a show controller, you're building a scene, update the current, and then you can fire a next and previous, modify the scene, update current again. So you can play with those two. Not sure, do I have them in the workspace cart? Maybe I have it, not in this one, yeah. Yeah, not in this one. But yeah, you could build yourself a cart as well. And that would be, the ideal scenario, like kind of your programming cart for people that are not familiar with carts. Carts is the ability with the iOS remote, to have some buttons, simple buttons to recall something. So you could build yourself a creation, a creation environment. Well, there it is right there, I think. Well, this is one example, little cart that would allow me to create some snapshots, update some snapshot, recall some snapshot, and so on and so forth. I would most probably want to put the next and previous. Actually, in our template, we have some carts with the next and previous and snapshot current snapshot update in it. Again, just many tools to actually create an environment for creation, remaining in QLab as much as possible, not having to fire, SPAT and QLab all the time. Voila. Here we are. So let me switch back right here. What do we've got? Yeah, let's talk about those templates. I can load one up if I want to show to you, for that matter of fact. But I was explaining you exactly what they are. It's the exact same thing to what I was explaining. But we have various templates possible. Number one, we have a new one that should be online shortly, which is 16 mono, 8 stereo. Objects, very simple to start. You can obviously modify it, but that gets you going right away. We have one specific to the cues. So I was showing you, right, recalling a presence, recalling a mute, recalling this. So it's an example file just for that. And we have a third one that's available for a snapshot cart example. So the, update current, and next and previous. So 3 templates are available. We make them available as Euro and US. We've been calling these different versions Euro and US, but that really is one using comma and one using period for the interpolation time. So we save you from having to modify, and remember, we now have a start file that gets you going right away, okay? And here we go with Q&A. Now I don't see my friend. Okay, well, let me get to see my friend. Sylvain Lambeau, a way to loop an OSC message in QLab. And what do we've got? Wenzomar, can I see? Arsene, yeah, okay. Can I see the positioning parameter change in a digital console external control when I send a trajectory view from QLab? Just kind of bidirectional connection. I'm not sure. Can I see the position parameter change in a digital console external control when I send a trajectory cue from QLab? Yes, totally. What our friend is referring to here, if I go in that remote, is the fact that, and you see it here, actually I've got a bunch of ins and outs on that particular remote machine. I'm getting input from an output from a console, but you see those messages that I was receiving from QLab on that port 8000 are going out to the console, for that matter of fact, and they're actually going out to other destination. That could be me outputting to a digital console, for example, changing those parameters. Now, understanding the digital console has a limitation of 8 OSC generic faders and 8 OSC buttons, but you could, capture. Now, you're not going to capture the trajectory, but you can recall the scene, and then those parameters will be updated on the digital OSC, the OSC integration of the digical console. Yes, I'm not sure if that's the question exactly, but you can definitely do this. Just kind of bidirectional communication. Yeah, well, so yeah, Wenzo, the conversation, I mean, QLab is one way. I mean, you're sending from QLang to SPAT. That's what it is. Now, what you do from SPAT, and thanks to these OSC connection, you can be outputting, yes, to digital. You could have a bidirectional digital configuration here. No problem. Now, I'm not sure why you would want to do this or what's the use case, but that's possible. Sylvain, what happened if we create both a show on QLab and SPAT and use a different speaker arrangement, larger, for example, for the show? OSC machine QLab move some. Yeah, I haven't done this. You see, Sylvain, you're there. He's there to bring me back in line. He's there to bring me back in line. Let me show you guys this. Okay, loading that session. I'm adding a speaker arrangement here. Okay, I'm going to connect all those sources. What's going to happen is if you modify this, let's say to the 9-array setup, so I'm changing the speaker arrangement. SPAT is actually intelligent enough to tell you, hey, my friend, you are now scaling that scene. So whatever you've been doing, and in the case here, we're changing a room that was normalized 2 meter, 2 meter. And for the one that cares to know, this is our normalized value for speaker arrangement. So it's basically looking at that new arrangement, and it's proposing to scale everything at 11.15. And it will scale everything to respect your creation. It will scale the well, first of all, there's something that we call the protection zone, which drives the attenuation model. That would get scaled. And it will even scale the automation. So if I actually, you see that soundscape here, you don't see much. Yeah, because I scale so much, I need to scale the source as well. Voila. Okay. So it scaled everything to that larger size, number one. And if I look on the output side, we have a scaling section. It applies the scaling. So every piece of automation that you would have done on a normalized system, binaural, if you want, but on a speaker arrangement, a standard speaker arrangement in SPAT that are all normalized at 2 meters, it would scale it, and every piece of automation coming in are being scaled right now. So it's all taking care of you, okay? You can change that scaling. You can put it back to 0 if you don't want to scale, but if your show was created. So if I move again to another venue, right, I go back to my setup, and I move back to another thank you, and I say, well, no, today is actually, we're going to that AES demo that I done. Again, it's going to change it now. Not much, interestingly enough, but it has scaled everything, okay? Yeah, scaled back to everything, scaled down. So we're now on a 3.250 scaling. So we're respecting as we're moving. So if you add automation done, now you're not obliged to apply this. You can, to apply the actual scaling. There's an option, OK and cancel, but it is proposed by default to simplify. So I'm assuming that's the question, Sylvain. That was a long answer. There's no quick one. Different speaker arrangement, larger, for example, distance specifically. Yeah, that's the distance scaling. You see it. Yep, right there. A way to loop an OSC message in QLab? No. I'm not a QLab designer, sound designer, so no. I mean, looping what? Typically, if you've got a single message, right? If we look at single messages, right, and no fade, it's just one message being sent. And there's no way to, do an infinite loop on it. There's maybe some tricks. There's most probably, a way to say at the end recall this one and create some loops. There are ways, but I don't have anything set up for that. Voila. That's it for questions. Is the crowd being that good? Or answers are all being given? It's up. Yeah, it's a bit longer than was expected. A lot of things to talk about, but feel free to join us on the Flux Immersive user group on Facebook. We actually have moderators online. People, the community is, sharing some interesting information and asking, obviously, at the same time, information. So, voila, that's it for me today. I think we are done. Thanks for everyone for watching, being so patient for just over an hour here instead of our 45-minute target. But yeah, hopefully you enjoyed the session. Have a great day and talk to you another time. Well, see you in a few weeks for another webinar. Cheers. Bye-bye.